Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns.
And it's Tuesday, May the 27th. Good morning. This is the Playbook Podcast. Dasha, it is an absolute delight to have you back with us. How was your Memorial Day weekend, Dasha?
Well, I've missed you. I've missed everyone. My Memorial Day weekend was full of convalescing. So, yeah, I had a bit of a medical emergency.
You took a whole week off Trump's White House. Can you imagine?
I did. It was devastating. I had major FOMO, but I hear Adam Wren held down the fort quite nicely for us.
He did. Like a legend, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, I had, that pesky appendix thing that we have that scientists don't really know, why it exists. I hear it's something about your gut microbiome now, they say might do something to help. Regardless, it didn't help me. It kind of hurt me. Got a good old-fashioned case of appendicitis.
Mate.
Had to have surgery. Watched all of the Mission Impossible movies, though, including the most recent one. So that was my recovery plan. Yeah, I don't recommend it. 0 stars on the appendicitis.
That is not the greatest Memorial Day weekend. But the weirdest Memorial Day weekend, I think, belongs to the President of the United States.
He did a lot more than watch Mission Impossible movies, let me tell you.
He did not spend it watching Mission Impossible movies. He did all the things that the President normally does. He went to West Point and he gave the speech to the graduates, and he went and did the very solemn speech at Arlington and all the stuff you're supposed to do. But it was just so Trumpified. It was unreal, He turns up at West Point in his MAGA hat, and he did an hour-long speech to these poor guys.
That's nothing. I've heard 90-plus minutes of that. I was there for the rally where he started to talk about Arnold Palmer's penis. So,
oh my gosh. It could have been worse. It could have been worse. He kicks off Memorial Day with a full caps, 300-word rant on Truth Social against all his enemies and so on. And then at this speech at Arlington, he's going on about the Biden years and the open border and all the rest of it. Then he pardons this guy when he comes out, this sheriff who's been convicted by a jury of taking bribes. It's not your sort of normal presidential Memorial Day weekend that I would have expected it to be,
It is classic Trump, though. Might not be classic, period, but it is classic Trump.
Not classic Trump is the fact that today he has nothing on his schedule. That's really unusual. I mean, days and days will go by, of course, when Joe Biden had nothing on his schedule, but it's unusual for Donald Trump. So leaves us with the question is, what is the big story today that we're going to talk about? Well, I think all of the interesting stories, or most of the interesting stories that are moving at the moment, Dasha, are all foreign affairs related. Let me just rattle through a few of them and then we can talk about where they might be headed. Ukraine is a really big moving story. We saw Donald Trump ranting at Vladimir Putin on Sunday night in a way that I certainly haven't seen him doing before. Yep. Real tone shift on that. So we should talk about that. Iran is potentially a big story. He said we could see good news in the next couple of days. He said that Sunday night. So could that be today? We don't know. There's nothing official planned. Gaza is obviously still a total mess, and we've seen Steve Witkoff, his envoy, frustrated, trying to negotiate there. Then we have this whole EU trade negotiation. Trump announced these massive tariffs on Friday, called them off again on Sunday. Now we have, 6 weeks to cut a deal with the EU?
Yeah, a bit of a moment to take a breath, but a lot to get done there.
Last but not least, the king, my king, is in Canada today to open the Canadian Parliament in person. And that
Canada, which is a Commonwealth.
Indeed. He is the King of Canada as well as the King of England, King Charles.
Yeah, I've been reading this is a big deal. Can you explain?
It's because normally the monarch doesn't show up in person to open the Canadian Parliament. Like they can do. It's their right. There's a throne and everything.
Wait, so there's literally a throne? There's a throne in Canada?
Of course. You can't have the king just sitting on a plastic chair, can you? Come on, he's a king, get a throne, right? But it is thought that the reason he's doing it in person this time is in a show of solidarity with Canada to remind certain people around these parts that Canada is a sovereign country, that it is part of the Commonwealth, it has a different history to the United States, it's very much its own country.
That it is not the 51st state or going to be the 51st state.
It is not the 51st state, exactly. And so today we will see these images of King Charles in the Canadian Parliament on his throne where he belongs. And it will be a message to a wannabe king in Washington, D.C. that, no, mate, you're no king. This is still my land. And that's just a pretty interesting moment to see that happen.
So big symbolic move to sort of come to the defense of Canada here.
It is. And it shows the pulling power that Mark Carney's got over in the UK, because, of course, Mark Carney used to be the Bank of England governor there for years. He's a very well-known figure. there, and he has these links in. Indeed, I read that one of his relatives works in the palace. So there you go. You have palace intrigue. Exactly. So that's one of the subplots happening today. Maybe not the most important one. I still think Ukraine is the biggest story this week. What did you make of Donald Trump's, as you say, tone shift on Sunday with Putin?
I mean, he almost sounded surprised that Putin is behaving the way he's behaving, which for anyone who's watched Putin's behavior and rule for the last many, many years, this is what he does. But I do think Trump thought this was going to be an easier problem to solve than it is. And he does have so much of his party, so much of his base that wants nothing to do with it. And then another part of his party that are super hawkish, that want him to really take it to Putin. But that also involves more investment from the US. That is less of the sort of nationalist America first approach. That's the more hawkish Republican approach. So the party is really kind of torn here. And for a while, it seemed like the president could offer to be peacemaker, bring people to the table, do his art of the deal thing, and keep the MAGA base happy because we're not sending a ton of money over there. But now Putin is proving difficult. He's not dramatically changing his actions. In fact, he keeps attacking civilians in Ukraine. And now the president has a problem. Is he going to stick it out and listen to some of the Republicans on the Hill who are Russia hawks? Or is he going to say, you know what? I'm done with this. Let's walk away. What interest do we have here? And find a way to sort of spin the message and save face when he's the guy that said he could solve it in 24 hours.
Exactly right. And he's not the first US president to have thought they could do a deal with Putin. I was reading somewhere going all the way back to George W. Bush, remembering that quote, I look this guy in the eyes and I can see into his soul. He said, or something like that. Anyway, he couldn't. Obama thought he could deal with Putin. There would be a reset. That didn't obviously work at all well. Trump believed he had this strong relationship with the guy, and seems to have genuinely felt that just by being president, because he thought he was getting on well with him, he would be able to talk him into stopping this war. And it obviously is a lot more difficult than that. Putin is not that kind of character, and you have to wonder where it leaves Trump. The Wall Street Journal reporting this morning that Trump's considering fresh sanctions this week. Hard to believe sanctions are going to make a big difference, but that's where we are. I think the bigger question is, what does walking away mean? Does it mean walking away, like military walking away, financial support walking away? Or does it just mean disengaging from a peace process, but continuing to fund and support Zelensky's war effort?
I think the reason Trump thought he could be different is because his relationship and the way that he's even talked about Putin has been so different than presidents of past, right? He's gotten a lot of criticism for cozying up to Putin, but in his eyes, that's been part of the art of the deal, right? I'm not going to treat this guy the way the US has treated him. We're throwing the rule book out the window. Like, we can be pals. We can admire each other's leadership in different ways. And so this should be easy for me, right? Turns out, just because you talk a little bit differently and you are a different kind of president doesn't mean that Putin is going to markedly change his ways. But I do think that leaves him at a crossroads, a tough crossroads for him, and at a perilous crossroads for the rest of the world, because what he decides to do here, whether that is walking away from the conflict or kind of leaning into what some of the more hawkish members of his party want, which is to take a much harsher stance on Putin, which at least tonally we have heard him do. And you can hear the applause almost from the people that have been waiting for him to start to take it to Putin a little bit in his party. But it's just not clear where this is going to land.
Pretty much a month away now. There's a big moment coming up on this. The NATO leaders are going to be gathering for their annual summit this year in Holland at the end of June. We're expecting Donald Trump to attend. And this is going to be a moment when all of those Western ally leaders get together with him to talk about the defense of Europe, to talk about the defense of Ukraine. And A, does he definitely attend? We think he will. But B, what sort of attitude is he going to turn up with? Is he going to be in listening mode? Is he going to be quite aggressive towards some of his allies?
He's had such a tenuous relationship with the idea of NATO. So we could get any version of Trump here.
But there's potentially going to be pretty good news for him there. We heard from Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, yesterday, that he thinks that NATO allies are going to sign up to this 5% spending target that Donald Trump has been floating. Now, that is a massive deal, a huge shift in terms of European security spending, and genuinely something that is down to Donald Trump's pressure. So from Trump's point of view, there's a massive win waiting for him if he turns up here and he wants to go and take it. But were he to turn up and say, oh yeah, and we're pulling out of Ukraine, that would put a very, very different spin on the way this summit is seen. So it's going to be a pretty big moment, I think, in The Hague in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely. And it's his approach to really all of this, which is destabilize and then reshape, right? And sometimes that reshaping looks not so dissimilar from the original, and sometimes it really does look dramatically different.
Right in the middle of that as well, of course, many of those NATO allies, the ones who are European Union members, are going to be right on the brink of a trade war with Donald Trump, given what he announced last Friday.
Well, at least serious negotiations.
Exactly. The new deadline for this enormous EU tariff, which Trump announced on Friday and then paused on Sunday, a 50% tariff, is in early July. So really like a week or two after this NATO summit happens. In theory, if they haven't reached a deal by then, he's going to be clobbering France and Germany and all these people at the summit with this massive new tariff.
Yeah, well, and the EU is already talking about countermeasures in case, this doesn't work out. This is what I'm talking about with destabilize and then reshape. I think in part, we've seen this pattern, right, where threatens tariffs or sometimes even enacts tariffs for 24 hours or whatever and then pulls back. That's become a pattern, and you could almost say a model for how he's doing these negotiations. Do something quite extreme, wait for some sign from the other party, the call from the EU leader saying, like, let's get this show on the road, let's speed up the talks. That gives him some sort of a win. Pull back and then delay. We've seen this time and again, and I think we're watching the strategy in real time.
My question would be, how much leverage does it really give you if everyone expects you to pull back again? Because that's what happens every single time. But I don't know. I'm not an art of the deal expert. But when he announced the tariffs on Friday, my first thought was, I wonder how long that'll last for. And the answer was about 48 hours in this
Memorial
case.
Day weekend.
Exactly. Got it all done and dusted before the weekend's over. Exactly. So how much that has actually had the EU panicking or not, I don't know. But they say they can cut a deal by early July. And so there's going to be some frantic negotiations involving your friend Howard Lutnick, Dasha and Jameson Greer, the US Trade Ambassador, and their counterparts in Europe are pretty much getting underway straight away this week, I think.
Yeah, I think that you need more than just Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is in the driver's seat. He is the architect of a lot of this now, which is a relief to Wall Street and to many of these foreign leaders as well. But certainly you have all of these other folks involved. Howard Lutnick loves to be involved. He has been someone who has ruffled feathers in the administration. But at this point, people are realizing how high the stakes are, and everyone seems to be, for the most part, singing from the same songbook. And all of that is trickling down both from Trump and then from Scott Bessent, who has his hands on all of this.
We've talked a lot about all this European politics. We're pretty much out of time, but we should mention it's possible we'll get this big announcement on a deal with Iran any time. There's noises coming out of the administration that we could get a positive announcement as early as today, or maybe not. We don't know, but it's certainly something I'll be keeping a close eye out for.
Yeah, President Trump said potentially within a couple of days. I mean, let's not forget that it is Trump who pulled us out of a nuclear deal with Iran. So it's so striking that now he has made this such a top priority early in his administration to work on this. Iran has come out and said some stuff to state media that seems to almost counter the narrative, saying like, look, we will survive if we don't get a deal with the US, we'll be fine. But Iran has serious interests here. Trump has serious interests here. The sticking point seems to be this uranium enrichment, which Iran says is a point of sovereignty. The US believes is nuclear, and it's sticky and it's difficult, especially considering everything else that you have going on in the Middle East right now and how much of a player Iran is in the region.
One thing I will be watching for if and when it's announced is just how different is it to the deal that Donald Trump abandoned, right? Like, that's the question. Nobody really knows.
That's my big question. Again, destabilize, reshape. How different is the shape? I don't know.
Should we finish on something a bit more lighthearted as we try and do? Dasha, you've pulled out a couple of fun birthdays from the Playbook birthday list this morning.
Happy birthday to Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
And happy birthday to David Plouffe, a Democratic strategist, someone who talks a lot in books and on TV and everywhere you look. And I'd just love to be a fly on the wall in both of those parties and compare and contrast.
They've got to be pretty different parties. Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Taylor Greene, last seen shouting at a British journalist in DC to go back to their own country. I won't take it personally.
Jack, I would not try to take a run at MTG. It will not go well. I'll take that one. I'll take that one for us.
I think I will avoid doing that. Absolutely. All right. Thanks very much, Dasha. That was great. Thank you for joining us when you're still on the mend. And that's all for today's Playbook podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. Thank you, Dasha.
And if you need to learn more about the appendix, call me up.
There you go. Maybe we'll spend tomorrow morning just talking all about appendicitis. See how many people tune in for that. All right. We'll be back then. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.